Welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I am joined by Dr. Armando Azua-Bustos. Dr. Armando, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having some time to speak with me.
Perfect. So, if you wouldn't mind, could you describe your work to the people that maybe are unfamiliar with it?
I call myself an astrobiologist. And astrobiology is a relatively new science. It started about the 1990s, which aimed to understand the origin of life on Earth and the possibility of finding life elsewhere in the universe. So, given the so broad focus of this new discipline, you may approach astrobiology from different field of research. For example, some can approach it from geology, some from astronomy or astrophysics or physics or mathematics, from biology, of course, and in my case, from microbiology. And I know some persons that are approaching astrobiology even from philosophy or law, including those very different disciplines. So I mostly work in studying environment on Earth that could give me hints of whether we could find life elsewhere, both in the solar system and elsewhere in the universe.
Okay. And I listened to and I saw your TED Talk on the most Martian place on Earth. So where is that? So where is that place located?
Well, this is come attached with an interesting and funny story because I was born and raised in the Atacama Desert, and in those times, most of the kids after finishing high school, since we all live in mining towns owned by the whole towns owned by the mining companies, you will understand that most of the kids would go into engineering, some kind of engineering, some maybe a few ones into medicine, and maybe some more law, and there are just very few of us that would be interested in biology, and that was different because you have to remind that the Atacama Desert in northern Chile is by far the driest and oldest desert on Earth. So to study things related to biology doesn't come easy. Thinking that we didn't have any much life around in order to be interested in this subject. So I started as a winemaker. In those years, I was advised that if I were to study biology, I would not find a job in Chile, which probably would be the case. Even now, if you study biology by itself, there isn't much chances of finding a job. It's the study field that would somehow approach me to understanding or working with life was the field, the range sciences, are also called agronomical sciences, which in my case I finished with the focus of understanding, how to grow fruits. So my first degree is in fruit culture and winemaking. But after working maybe a year and a half, maybe a little more in the winemaking industry in Chile, but which in those times was just beginning to be the really known industry that is now, that you know now. I quickly got pretty bored. I didn't find it I didn't find it to be an intellectual challenge. So I couldn't picture myself doing the same thing, even in the world of wines is interesting or fun even. I couldn't picture myself doing the same thing for the next 50 years. So I came back to my true love in knowledge, which was science. I mean, I was known to be in high school, even before that, to be the guy that was always exploring around and doing some crazy experiments. And so that brought me to my PhD degree, which is in molecular genetics and microbiology, which, as I said at the beginning, allowed me to get into this new field with some help of some researchers of NASA by the beginners of the 2000s, in this new field of astrobiology, having in mind and having also the advantage of knowing this so amazing desert, which is the Atacama, which about 20 years ago already, someone proposed that given the characteristics of Atacama, was a good analog model of Mars. And so I detected that I had an advantage there of knowing that desert very well. So I'm basically studying many of the places and sites or things or events or phenomena that I witnessed as a kid when growing in this place.
Well, what are some life forms, or what are some of the indigenous lives that exist in the Atacama Desert? Like, are there? I mean, do plants grow there, or do animals live there? Like, what's the ecosystem like?
It depends on where you are in the Atacama. You might remember the shape of Chile. Chile is a very long and thin country, so the Atacama starts in the frontier with Peru. There is a desert called La Joya, which goes into Peru, which is not as dry as the Atacama. And so if you go further south, we're speaking about maybe, let's say, 1,600 kilometers south, you still have the Atacama Desert, maybe a little less than that amount. And so in that part of the desert, you do find all kind of life, like many different type of plants and animals, etc. And then maybe you have read in the news that from time to time, that part of the Atacama gets a little more rain than the usual, and so you have flowering all around. And then if you go to the Pacific Ocean, then you have the coastal range of the Atacama. And then if you go to the Andes Mountains, you have to the other side, to the east, you have a completely different ecosystem. So when people think of Atacama in being the really right places, is the central valley of the Atacama, between more or less, let me remember about 20 to 22, maybe 24 degrees of latitude. There you have the really right part of the Atacama, which is the high pyradic core. You cannot see anything by the eye, anything growing in miles and miles around, and you have to take a microscope and then know how to look in particular places in order to just find a few living microorganisms that are here and there, because in particular substrate they find a little bit more protection from the sun, or maybe the substrate itself is able to capture water from the atmosphere. And so it depends on the Atacama where you would see, what kind of life you would see. In the hyperadic core, virtually nothing. You have to take a microscope in order to find a few microorganisms that are able to live there. But if you move farther south, the story is completely different.
So one thing I wanted to ask about was, I mean, I think typically when they think of life outside of Earth, I think oftentimes people think of like extremely advanced, alien civilizations, for example. Like you're a common person, right? Like, yeah. Like I guess my question would be, yeah, if life outside of the Earth was found, I mean, what do you think that life would be like? I mean, do you think it would be something very like simplistic, or do you think it could be entities that could think consciously like how we do? Like what do you think life in space would actually be like?
Well, this is such an interesting question, and the answer so fascinating that we could be speaking about this for hours. It depends. In the solar system, at least, if we ever find life, I would bet that there will be the type similar to the type of the microorganisms which we find on Earth. Actually, the most prevalent and the most diverse type of life in our planet are microorganisms, of which we know let's say 3% of the million species that are living around on Earth. So if we think about life on Mars, for example, or the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, where we have hints that there may be moons, or in the case of Mars, a planet where you can find liquid water, we expect to find, if there is life on those bodies, you would expect to find the type of life is similar to microorganisms on Earth. But if you are optimistic and thinking, for example, the case of Europa, which is one of the moons of Jupiter, Europa, we know that it has a hidden internal sea covered by a thick layer of ice. which if you calculate how much water is in there, actually has more water than the planet Earth. So with that amount of water, since we know that it is in the liquid state, and we know also that it may contain different kind of elements that we know that would allow for life to rise and then evolve. If you're truly optimistic, you may think that you could find something more elaborate, something similar to, just an example, a shrimp or a fish. But in the case of the universe, we're just starting to know how many other planets are out there. And now we know that there is thousands and thousands of planets where, with the conditions that at least we know that would allow for life to rise similar to Earth. But again, we're still looking for life as we know it. And so, if you then include the type of life form that you could not even imagine of how they are made of or how they would evolve, then maybe life could be an interesting phenomena where you could recognize life forms that are similar to the ones we know on Earth, but maybe others are completely different.
So you talked about some of the planets that have to have, or even at moons that would have to have conditions that are similar to Earth. Like, what would you say? I'm sure there's probably a generally consensus thought about what that planet would actually have to be like, but what are some of the requirements actually for life to exist on other bodies? I mean, like, would it have to have, like, what would the temperature kind of be like? What would, what kind of resources would have to be like? What would that actually look like?
Well, that again is a quite a complex answer, because again, when we try in general to think about life elsewhere, you expect to find in similar environment to the one you find on Earth. So with a temperature not too high, not too cold, with pHs not too high or too low, with radiation that allow for a very compact node to disintegrate, etc., etc. But in the last decade, we have found a fantastic example of how life is able to adapt to the most extreme environments on Earth. So you may find the life forms in very extreme environments where you would think preliminarily that you couldn't and you shouldn't find any type of life forms, as we have been surprised over and over again in the kind of Earth. And then again, we are still thinking about life as we know it. So that's why when we first try to look for life from the solar system, for example, we're trying to find a liquid water in the first step, because we know that all life on Earth depends on liquid water to survive. And so that's why, for example, in the case of NASA, that they established this way of searching for life on Mars, thinking on this model, follow the waters, having the evidence of first whether you have liquid water on Mars, then in those places you have evidence of that happening or have happened in the past. Then you would say, well, if we have liquid water here, maybe we could find life here. But again, that's a very restrictive way of thinking of finding life, just because it's similar to us. So that gives the following question: If we don't find life as we know it on Mars, doesn't mean that Mars is a lifeless planet? No, it just says that we haven't found life as we know it. If life arose on Mars with different characteristics than the one we know on Earth, maybe there is still some of those life forms here and there, but we don't simply nowadays, except one method that have been reported, there's no way we could try to look or find or understand life as we don't know it.
Well, I guess that kind of leads to this next question, and that being that, in your opinion, what do you think is one of the greatest misconceptions about life in space or life outside of the Earth? Like, I'm sure that there are people in your field that, probably have theories about potential life, outside of the Earth that you probably just vastly disagree with. Like, what are some of those common misconceptions in your opinion?
The first thing, I think there is even a space because we still haven't come out with a generally accepted definition of what is life. If I'm correct, there has been a few conferences trying to come out with a generally accepted definition of life, but we have been able to, because every time you try to give the characteristics of life, then someone else points out on what you could find, on how you could find a similar phenomena in the non-living world. For example, if we say, well, life reproduces, and I could say, well, fire also reproduces. If I set this table on fire, it quickly will take onto the chairs. And then someone could say, well, life evolves. And I can also again can give the example of fire. Say, well, this fire that is eating now the table now has evolved in order to eat the curtains of my rooms. So you see the problem, not even being able to define what life is very problematic on trying to find elsewhere in the universe, having no particularly good idea of what life is in the first place. So we're just, I think, approaching in a point in time where we're just becoming aware that there may be life as we don't know it, even on Earth, and I can explain that later. And then again, if you don't detect life and you don't have any evidences of life and in this or on that place, actually, from my point of view, that doesn't tell you much. It just only tell you that if you're looking for red bats, if you don't find red bats in one place, it doesn't mean that you will not find blue bats, right? So I think it's a very intricate question, and that will be continuing to be the case until we find a different life different life forms on, for example, in the solar system that could give us a hint on what could be a definition of life for two bodies of the solar system, for two planets, for example, or one moon or one planet, something like that.
Well, so I want to touch on this idea that you mentioned. The idea of maybe their life being a life existing on Earth that we aren't able to measure. Would you mind maybe talking a little bit more about that?
Sure. This researcher a few years ago proposed that, well, we do know that life originated on Earth in the so-called phase of the Earth, which was the late bombardment phase, which was the last moment on Earth where you still have a rather common input of impacting bodies like meteorites or asteroids or comets. Okay, so that means that life could have originated more than once, and then you may have a life origin event that was entirely wiped out by a hitting asteroid, and then maybe life could have arose again, and then entirely wiped out until the next asteroid or something like that. And so that means that that's why we don't speak about, in my field, we don't speak about the origin of life on Earth. We speak about the origins, plural, of life on Earth, just to account for that possibility. So that means that all life as we know it, of course, evolved from this last event of the origin of life. But maybe you could have a different origin of life before that, with a few representatives still around. And if that is the case, that would be an entirely different origin of life, and maybe with different rules, and maybe they are using somehow different molecules, and maybe you could still find it around in what is have been known to be the shadow biosphere, the alternative form of life, and then and actually having part of an attempt to find such alternative form of life. Which could have come out from this previous origin of life on Earth. This is again, it's a fascinating possibility.
And who are do you know of who are the lead researchers in that field? Are there people that specialize in that?
The one that proposed that idea was he's Paul Davis. He's the director of the Research Institute as part of the University of Arizona. Beyond, somehow something like with Beyond or something like that. But it's Paul Davis at the University of Arizona. That's the one that first proposed a few years ago, maybe not a few years, maybe more than 5 years ago, this alternative of the shadow biosphere.
Wow. So what do you think this other kind of life, in your opinion, what do you think it would actually be like? Are we talking something that would be invisible to the human eye, or do you what would that life actually be like in your opinion?
I think they would be very similar to the life as we know it, but differently made. I could see something that looks like a microorganisms, but then I may try to find DNA, and I could not amplify because it have a different a molecule in order to store information. Maybe something that is very different, very similar to DNA, but not the same. Or maybe in the case of in the case of all life on Earth, we do use particular type of molecules. For example, if I'm correct, all amino acids are a particular type of orientation, which in this alternative form of life could have a different orientation, and so on and so on. So maybe they will be similar. Probably they will all be similar to microorganisms that look like a microorganism, but when you inspect them closely, maybe you will start finding differences in how they made their proteins, or how they store their information, genetic information, or how they store and obtain their energy, etc., etc. Nothing like an elephant with the 2 trunks or 8 eyes or something like that.
Okay. So another thing I was wondering is, just from your research and just, all the, I guess, information out there right now, like, what are most planets and moons actually like? Like, at least the ones that have been observed. I mean, are they mostly similar to the Earth's moon, where it's just craters and there's not really a lot happening and the sky is...
That we still do not know, but we will know in maybe 1 or 2 years, no more than that, because we already know that there is at least 4,000 other planets beyond Earth in very close to our solar system, in the local neighborhood, so to speak. And those 4,000 planets are organized in a little more than 3,000 new planetary systems. And you have for all type of planets, planets the size of Jupiter, planet the size of Earth, planet the size of Mercury, but you also have planets much bigger than Jupiter's, and you have similar planet to Earth, but also again much bigger, the so-called super Earths. And so there's a huge variety of different planets, and that's the interesting thing, because we are now in a stage we're now from all those 4,000 or more planets, and every day that passes a new other planet, so the so-called exoplanets, are being discovered. We're in the range with the technological capacity that we have now in order to detect smaller and smaller planets as the time advances. So we are in a stage now that we are now able to tell from all those planets which are habitable. That means that would have the conditions in order to have life, whatever type of life you could imagine. And from those planets, we are now inspecting a few ones in order to truly say, well, we have found evidence that something is going on in that particular planet that looks like it may be inhabited. That answer we will have maybe tomorrow, maybe in 6 months, maybe in 1 year, but no more than that. I mean, we are very close in order to have the first evidence of life in another planet, not because we are looking at the life itself, because we are looking, for example, in the case of Earth, we have an unusual amount of oxygen that cannot be made and not being that stable in time in a planet, except if it's being made by life, for example. So if we detect oxygen in a particular planet, that may be evidences of, for example, photosynthesis or something like similar to that. So the type of evidence that we will expecting, it will be in a preliminary evidence, saying, well, since we have detected, for example, an unusual amount, an unstable amount of methane very high in a particular planet, then you could say, well, that planet in particular is interesting in order to, for example, try to send a meteor or something like that.
Mm. So do you think, I mean, so what you were just saying right now, like once life is actually discovered outside of the Earth, I guess what kind of impact do you think that will actually have on society? I mean, do you think that will change the way people believe things? Like, what kind of impacts do you think it'll actually have on the people of Earth?
Yeah, that will depend on what are the type of life we find and where do we find it. So, for example, if we find microbial life in the solar system, it will have an impact, but I don't think it will surprise much the science establishment or the general public beyond a few weeks. Oh, we have found a different type of microorganisms on Mars. Maybe it will hit the news for several months and that's it. But if we find something more complicated like that on Mars, that will have, for some, of course, a high impact. And so again, if we find evidence of intelligent life, not in the solar system, that's not unlikely. All the planets of the solar system are close enough in order to be inspected on time, and we don't have any any evidence that could be the case. But if we find evidence of intelligent life elsewhere in this neighborhood of planets that are around our solar system, that of course I think that will have a huge impact. You could imagine something like happened in this movie, The Arrival, when in the case where a spaceship arrives on Earth and the impact that it has on the human society. But I think that impact, huge impact, will be equally similar if we receive a message from space saying, well, we are planet X and we are 40 light years away from you, and we are here, right? So I think the more complex the life, that will have a bigger impact on human society. Microbes on Mars, of course, but not. I think that's not comparable to receiving a message like Jodie Foster receiving this movie Contact, right? With objective evidence of complex civilization elsewhere.
Wow, this is definitely a lot of interesting things. Doctor, I want to thank you again so much for coming on. How can we follow your work? And do you have a website or anything? How can we read more of the papers and things that you've written?
There's several ways. First, you can look at my YouTube channel. There's a number of videos that I'm usually uploading there with the sites I'm studying in different places. Then you can find all my papers available at this webpage called ResearchGate. You can download all of them there. And then the TED platform, you can, as you mentioned in some part of the conversation, you can watch my TED talk. This is the first one. I'm just about to give my third one in Spain in next month, and also have a webpage which is called Astrobiology in Chile, which more or less resumes all my work on the research I'm doing.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you again so much, Armando, and I look forward to talking to you again soon, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
All right. Thank you for your interest.
All right. Take care.